Unboxing, walkthrough and review of the OYAYO keyboard and controller. My apologies in advance for the terrible pronunciation of the company, but this make is new to me, and the reason for that is probably that they only sell off Amazon. So I'll put the link down below in the description to their Amazon store in case you're interested in buying one of these, or if you'd just like to get more information. If you're watching this video because you're a subscriber and you're more interested in learning music, it's worth still watching the video because it'll give you some idea of what capabilities MIDI has and how you can use it when you want to create your own music. So let's start by taking a look at what this keyboard and MIDI controller has to offer. Looking at the Amazon listing, you can see it's got 25 touch sensitive keys, 8 drum or percussion pads, 8 assignable control knobs, a modulation strip, a pitch bend strip, some buttons to set the internal parameters of the keyboard, and a small OLED screen. Because it was dispatched by Amazon themselves, it came very quickly, and it arrived in a generic Amazon box. The unboxing. I think Amazon are improving in their packing. It wasn't long ago when they were sending everything out in wildly oversized boxes, but this doesn't seem to happen these days. Inside the Amazon box is just a little bit of paper to prevent the inner box from rattling around too much. And there's the inner box, really brightly coloured, but you'd have to wrap it well if it was a gift because it's obvious what it is. And there's our first look at the device, and my first thoughts are that it's very small. Right, I'll finish unpacking it so we can take a good look at what comes in the box. The keyboard has come wrapped in a plastic bag to prevent damp from getting into it. With the keyboard in the box are a user manual and a USB lead. We'll take a look at these first before we take a good look at the keyboard. The lead is a standard USB Type A to USB Type C lead, so it's interchangeable if you decide you want to buy a longer lead in the future. The lead provided is just over a metre, or 120 centimetres if you want to be exact. The user manual is pretty small, but it seems to have everything you need to know in it. However, the text is really small, but readable. Right, let's start taking a good look at the keyboard. The first thing I notice is just how small and light it is. It really is tinsy. Here I've put it on an A4 piece of paper, and you can see it's not as wide as an A4 piece of paper, but a little bit longer. And for me, its size is an advantage, because I'd want it to sit on my desk alongside a mouse mat, a keyboard, and another controller, so this is the perfect size. To give you a real sense of scale, here it is alongside a couple of rulers. To hold, the device is very much what you'd expect. It's plastic all around, but at the same time it's very solidly built. The biggest surprise to me is that the keys are a satin finish rather than the usual high gloss finish, and this gives it a bit of a unique feel. The rotary encoders are solid and there's no play in them. And they are proper rotary encoders, so they've got full 365-degree rotation, which has massive advantages when you use it with a DAW or with software. All the buttons have a rubber feel, and so do the percussion pads, and they feel quite solid. I wouldn't feel worried about banging them with the end of my fingers. It's got 2 capacitive touch bars, one for modulation and one for pitch bends. And it's also got a small OLED screen that we'll look at in a minute. On the back, it's got 3 sockets, one for the USB Type-C, one which is a MIDI out, and one for a sustain pedal. I'll plug the USB in now so we can take a good look at it under power. When I plugged the USB in, it didn't ask for any drivers or complain. It just started working straight away, both on Windows 10 and on Windows 11. And in the Windows control panel, it just shows up as being a USB MIDI device. When you connect it up, the OLED display shows some default parameters: the key signature, the octave, and the tempo in beats per minute. I've been rattling my brains on how best to review this, because it is a controller, so any sounds have really got very little to do with the keyboard and the controls on it, because the sounds are coming from either the synthesizer in my computer, which would be a VSTi in a DAW, or it'll be coming from a synthesizer itself that's being controlled by MIDI. And this leads me on to a very brief lesson for those of you who aren't familiar with MIDI controllers. A MIDI controller is really a dumb terminal, or something with nothing in itself except the ability to control something else. So you can't expect to get a MIDI controller keyboard and expect it to have sounds in it. The sounds come from whatever it's controlling. And you might be thinking then that a MIDI keyboard is worthless. But in fact, quite the opposite. A MIDI keyboard opens up the door to vast amount of resources, and these are available on the internet in the form of VST instruments. And there's lots of really good ones you can pay for, but there's also lots of really good ones that you get for free. And these are in effect sound modules that live in your computer. So you can see, without the keyboard, you couldn't play those. So the MIDI controller or MIDI keyboard has opened up your computer's capability of making lots of amazing music. And the only thing to hold you back then is your own creativity, which does develop in time. Something important I need to mention before we continue on with the review is that controllers come in a whole spectrum of different types for different purposes. So for example, you could get a full-sized keyboard, or a controller which is nothing but pads, or another one that might look like a mixing desk, so you can control your DAW or recording software from it. And this is just 3 types. There's multiple different types. Looking at the keyboard controller I'm reviewing today, you can see it's got a little bit of everything. So it's especially useful for people who are starting out, or people who want to be able to do everything from a small desk space. Right, let's get back to the review, and I'll test as many functions as I can. And we'll start with the keyboard. The keyboard has got 25 keys, which is 2 full octaves, and all the keys are touch sensitive, which means they'll record the velocity or how hard you press on the keys. And here's how that sounds. I'm using the DAW I used to record the voiceover, which is Studio One, and I'm using Contact 7 with Alicia Keys piano sound in it. Softly, full force. And because that's a MIDI recording, you can edit it if you want to. All the keys work, and the touch sensitivity is quite uniform across the keyboard. And it feels quite nice, but the satin finish gives it a strange texture that just feels different under the fingers. But with something so small, with just 2 octaves, you couldn't learn to play the piano on it or do any serious piano work. But it'd be ideal for creating your own backings, for singing or guitar solos or whatever. For creating bass lines, the 2-octave keyboard is a good portion of the range of a 4-string bass. The drum pads are also touch sensitive, and when you strike them, they actually show you the velocity or how hard you've hit the pad on the OLED screen. But if you find the touch sensitivity a pain, you can actually disable it by using the full level button. And the drum pads light up different colours, which is pretty cool. Another useful setting the drum pads have is the AB setting, which effectively doubles the number of pads you've got in the keyboard. Right, let's take a look at the modulation strip and the pitch bend strip. And I've noticed straight away that both of these show their output on the OLED screen again. This could be particularly useful if you were having a problem and the sound wasn't changing. You can see if it's the synthesizer's fault or the MIDI controller's fault. Here's the effects the modulation strip and pitch bend strip have on the bass sound I used earlier. And they work really effectively. The last part of the controller to control external devices are the knobs or controllers, and these can be assigned to whatever you want. For example, the volumes of each track in a DAW, or particular effects in an effects unit, or particular effects in a synthesizer, or anything you want. And with most software, you've got a MIDI learn function, which is really easy to learn. You just move the knob on screen and move the knob on the controller, and they automatically assign to each other. What I've been showing in the background is Native Instruments Control, which has got exactly 8 knobs at the top of the screen that can be assigned to each of the controllers. Right, let's take a look at the 6 buttons underneath the OLED screen. And we'll start with the bottom 2, which are transpose down and transpose up, which move every key on the keyboard up by a semitone or down by a semitone, which is useful if you want to play in a different key but don't know how. The middle 2 keys are octave up and octave down, and this is if you find the 2 octaves that are available to you on the keyboard not enough, you can use these to play much higher or much lower. The top 2 buttons, and in addition most of the keys on the keyboard, are functions of the arpeggiator. An arpeggiator is a legacy function from when synthesizers could only play one note. So rather than playing a chord, you'd play all the notes in the chord individually. But this created a very popular sound, which is still popular today. So if we play a chord with the arpeggiator enabled, it'll play the notes one at a time. And there's loads of variations on the arpeggiator, and you can change them by pressing the arpeggio key and either using the keys on the keyboard or the rotary encoders. And some of the parameters you can change are arpeggiating up, arpeggiating down, random arpeggiation, arpeggiate in crotchets, quavers, quaver thirds, and much more. You can arpeggiate over several octaves, and you can change the swing feel of the arpeggiator. And of course, you can either change the speed using the tap function, or you can adjust it using the rotary encoder. Or if you prefer, you can synchronize it with your DAW. I'm just using a piano sound here so you can hear what's going on. But you can imagine what it'd sound like with a retro style synth synchronized with a drum machine using these arpeggios. It would sound really cool. Another of the features I'm sure some people would find really useful is the note repeat feature. And this means if you hold your finger on a note or a pad, it'll keep repeating that. And you can set the speed, and you can set whether it's crotchets, quavers, etc. the same way you set the arpeggio speed. And the most basic and obvious use of it would be to create a metronome beat. Though you can create some really mad effects by speeding things up massively. The last function I'll mention is the loop, and how this works is you press the loop button down and then play what you want to play and then release the loop button and it'll just loop it over and over again. I'm sure I must have missed some feature or another during this review, but there's so much in this keyboard, it's easily done. And if I did cover every feature in detail, the video would go on forever. But before we get to the conclusion, I'd like to just quickly take a look at the output sockets. One of them we've been using throughout this demonstration, and that's the Type-C USB, which is really useful because it just connects this with your computer. However, there's also the socket for a sustain pedal, which is a standard for most keyboards. And then, more importantly, there's a MIDI out socket. But this isn't your standard 5-pin DIN connector that you've looked at in the previous video. This is a TRS 3.5mm connector that needs a special Type A MIDI out connector to it. And the adapter will allow you to use the 5-pin DIN connector, which means you can plug it into any MIDI device that needs a controller. To test this, I didn't plug it into the computer. I used a standard USB power supply, and then I plugged the controller straight into a synth, and it worked perfectly. And I think this could be particularly useful because you don't have to rely on a computer. Here it is playing a retro style polyphonic synth without being plugged into the computer, just into a USB power supply, and then using the MIDI out to go straight into the back of the module. It is playing a mono synth, and this means the synth can only play one note. So if I try to play chords, you just get a partial single note. So to play a chord equivalent, we use the arpeggio function. This synth was designed to be a percussive instrument, which means it's supposed to just produce like synthesized drum style tracks. But once you plug this keyboard in, it changes the nature of the synth and it becomes quite tuneful. I think I've covered everything I can in this video, and the only thing I know I've missed is the Bluetooth, because this MIDI controller actually has Bluetooth. But I'll cover that in a separate video. Conclusion. Something I forgot to mention at the beginning, which is important. To be completely honest and transparent, I didn't pay for this device. They sent it to me to review. But I will be completely honest and I will say it's rubbish if I think it's rubbish. So now let's get on with the conclusion. This is a really useful and fun device. The thing that stands out to me with it is the arpeggiation functions and just how editable they are. Another thing that stands out to me is the fact that these functions are all built into the actual hardware, whereas with most MIDI controllers, all the functions are in the software, so you have to go through an installation process before you can use them. However, this you could take from computer to computer without having to think about installations and drivers. It just plugs in and goes, and I think that's a real advantage. Also, for me, the size is a big advantage as well. I'm always struggling for space, and I can easily find somewhere where something this small can live, and it can stay on my desk where it's convenient, and that to me is a massive advantage, rather than having to walk across the room or plug in a large keyboard. To have something that can sit to the side and is always plugged in is a real convenience. The only downside to this is the fact that it hasn't got an on-off switch. So if you leave it plugged into your computer, it'll be on all the time the computer's on. The disadvantage of the size is the fact that you've just got a 2-octave keyboard and the keyboard is smaller than a standard size. But this is perfectly adequate if you're trying to build up a piece of music in a DAW using single notes or short chords. But if you're learning keyboard, or if you are a keyboardist, this might not be right for you, as the 2 octaves is limiting. The construction is very good. Whilst it is plastic, it's still very well put together, and I've been using it for the last week and I've not been treating it carefully. But it's taken all the abuse and not shown any sign of damage or even scratching. But you have to beware, it is plastic, so if you were to drop something heavy on it, or to drop it from a height onto a hard floor, this could potentially break it. So be aware of this if you're thinking of buying one of these for a child. The touch sensitivity for all the keys is very good, and it's really nice for putting creativity into whatever you're recording. But I was finding the touch sensitivity on the pads was quite hard to use, so I was using the full level setting more often than not. And this brings me neatly back to the available functions on the controller, because it's got a full level switch, and a repeat note switch, and a loop switch, and these are all things that people will find useful. So, to summarise the summary, I think this is a really nice, useful piece of kit, and it's got something for an experienced musician, but also there's plenty there for an absolute beginner. So anyone who makes their own music or wants to make their own music could really find a use for one of these. And in a really crowded market with so many MIDI controllers out there made by big makers, this holds its place quite nicely. So if you want more information about this controller, or if you want to buy it, I've put the link down below in the description to where you can buy it on Amazon. And I don't get any commission if you buy it, but I think it's a good device at a good price. And I think that's all I can say. So if you've enjoyed this video, and if you'd like to see more like it, or if you'd just like to support the channel, please like, subscribe and hit the bell icon, and then you'll be notified when I upload new videos. And if you'd like to see more videos like this, or if you'd like to learn to play the guitar, visit my YouTube channel or go to www.ebooksforguitar.com, and there you'll find the guitar courses in order, and you'll be able to download the PDF ebooks completely free. Thank you very much for watching. And to subscribers, a special thanks, because your support is really appreciated.